In a quiet nursing home outside Tampa, Florida, 79-year-old Eleanor Whitmore died peacefully in her sleep on a warm October morning. Or at least, that is what everyone believed at first. Her daughter, Rebecca Whitmore, 47, had been at her bedside the night before, holding her hand, reading passages from Eleanor's favorite books. The nurses described Rebecca as devoted, the kind of daughter who visited daily, brought flowers, and never missed a birthday or holiday celebration at the facility. 3 days before Eleanor's death, Rebecca had helped her mother update her will. The new document transferred Eleanor's $1.5 million life insurance policy, originally split between Rebecca and her younger brother Michael, entirely to Rebecca. Eleanor's signature was shaky but present on every page. The witnesses were nursing home staff who saw an elderly woman making what seemed like reasonable end-of-life decisions. Before this story reveals how love becomes greed and greed becomes murder, subscribe now. What happened to Eleanor Whitmore is part of a pattern investigators almost missed, and understanding how could save someone you know. Eleanor had lived a modest but secure life. Her late husband, a commercial airline pilot, had purchased substantial life insurance decades earlier. After his death from a heart attack 12 years ago, Eleanor became the sole beneficiary of his estate, including the policy that would eventually pass to their children. She lived independently until a stroke 2 years earlier left her with limited mobility and mild cognitive impairment. That is when she moved into Sunset Gardens, a mid-range assisted living facility in Hillsborough County. Rebecca visited often. At first, she brought Eleanor's favorite foods, updated family photos for her room, and coordinated with staff to ensure her mother received good care. But over time, financial pressure began reshaping Rebecca's priorities in ways no one initially noticed. Rebecca's life looked successful from the outside, a marketing consultant with her own small firm, a renovated townhouse in South Tampa, a BMW in the driveway. But beneath the surface, debt was crushing her. Business loans she could not repay. Credit cards maxed out. A gambling habit she hid from everyone, including her brother Michael, who lived in Atlanta and visited their mother only occasionally. Rebecca began viewing her mother's life insurance not as a future inheritance, but as a solution to immediate problems. And when Eleanor mentioned during one visit that she was considering leaving half the policy to a charity she had supported for years, Rebecca made a decision. She would not let that happen. The plan started simple. Convince Eleanor to change the will. Rebecca framed it as protecting the family, arguing that Michael, who had a stable tech job and no financial stress, did not need the money as much as she did. Eleanor, whose memory and judgment were declining, eventually agreed to sign new documents drafted by a lawyer Rebecca hired specifically because he asked few questions. But changing the will was not enough. Rebecca needed Eleanor to die soon, before she changed her mind again, before Michael visited and questioned the new arrangement, before anyone realized what was happening. That is when Rebecca began researching methods that would look natural in an elderly woman already in declining health. Poison had a long, grim history of being difficult to detect, especially in victims whose deaths could be easily attributed to age or existing conditions. Rebecca's research led her to antifreeze, specifically ethylene glycol. It is a poison that mimics the symptoms of stroke, kidney failure, or severe flu, all conditions that would be expected in a 79-year-old nursing home resident. Small doses administered over time could be virtually undetectable without specific toxicology tests that are rarely ordered for elderly patients who die of natural causes. She purchased antifreeze online, choosing a supplier that sold pure ethylene glycol without the bittering agent added to commercial products to prevent accidental ingestion. The order was shipped discreetly. Rebecca stored it in her home in an unmarked container, hidden behind cleaning supplies under her kitchen sink. The poisoning began 2 weeks before Eleanor's death. During her daily visits, Rebecca brought Eleanor her favorite drink, sweet iced tea in a large insulated cup. The nursing home allowed family members to bring food and beverages, especially for residents who had specific preferences. No one questioned it. Rebecca was the devoted daughter. Why would anyone suspect her? She added small amounts of ethylene glycol to the tea, just enough to make Eleanor feel ill, but not enough to trigger immediate alarm. Eleanor began complaining of nausea, fatigue, and confusion. The nursing staff attributed it to her existing conditions. They adjusted her medications. They increased monitoring. But no one suspected poisoning. If someone you know is in a nursing home and a family member suddenly becomes overly involved with their care right before a financial change, keep watching. The warning signs are subtle, but they're there. Rebecca escalated the doses gradually. Within a week, Eleanor was experiencing severe symptoms: vomiting, disorientation, difficulty breathing. The nursing home called Rebecca multiple times, expressing concern. Rebecca always responded appropriately, arriving quickly, appearing distressed, asking all the right questions. She even suggested they call Eleanor's doctor, knowing the physician would likely attribute the symptoms to Eleanor's age and pre-existing health issues. Eleanor's primary care physician visited and ordered basic blood tests. They showed kidney stress and dehydration, both consistent with an elderly patient in decline. No one ordered a specific test for ethylene glycol poisoning. Why would they? There was no reason to suspect it. During this time, Rebecca maintained her facade flawlessly. She updated Michael by phone, framing their mother's decline as natural and expected. She cried appropriately. She expressed gratitude to the nursing staff. She even brought gifts for the nurses: coffee, pastries, thank you cards, building goodwill that would later make it harder for anyone to believe she could be capable of harm. 3 days before Eleanor's death, Rebecca arrived with the updated will documents. Eleanor was weak, confused, and barely coherent, but Rebecca guided her hand across the signature lines. 2 nursing home employees witnessed the signing, noting that Eleanor seemed tired but aware. Legally, the new will was valid. Rebecca was now the sole beneficiary of $1.5 million. That night, Rebecca administered the final, lethal dose. She stayed late, sitting beside Eleanor's bed, holding her hand, playing soft music from her phone. The nursing staff saw a devoted daughter spending precious final hours with her dying mother. What they did not see was Rebecca adding a concentrated dose of ethylene glycol to Eleanor's evening medication cup, mixed with juice to mask any residual taste. Eleanor died at 4:37 a.m. on October 18th. A nurse found her unresponsive during routine rounds. The on-call doctor pronounced her dead. Cause of death: natural causes consistent with advanced age and multiple health complications. No autopsy was ordered. There was no reason to suspect foul play. Rebecca was notified immediately. She arrived at the nursing home within 30 minutes, tears streaming down her face, thanking the staff for everything they had done. She made funeral arrangements that same day. She contacted Michael, who expressed sadness but was not surprised. Their mother had been declining for weeks. Within 72 hours, Eleanor was cremated. Any physical evidence of poisoning was destroyed. Michael Whitmore arrived in Tampa 2 days after his mother's death. At 43, he worked as a software engineer in Atlanta, lived a stable life, and had always maintained a respectful but somewhat distant relationship with his mother. He visited a few times a year, called monthly, and trusted that Rebecca, who lived locally, was handling their mother's care. But when Michael sat down with Rebecca to discuss Eleanor's affairs, he noticed things that did not add up. Rebecca mentioned casually that their mother had updated her will shortly before her death, leaving the entire life insurance policy to her. Michael was shocked. Their mother had always insisted on treating her children equally. Why would she suddenly change that? Rebecca had an answer ready. Mom knew I was struggling financially. She wanted to help me. She said you were doing fine and didn't need it as much. Michael was skeptical but initially accepted the explanation. Grief and family dynamics often produce uncomfortable conversations. He did not want to accuse his sister of manipulation while they were both mourning. But over the next week, as Michael helped sort through Eleanor's belongings at the nursing home, he began hearing things from staff that troubled him. One nurse mentioned how Rebecca had been bringing Eleanor special drinks every day during her final weeks. Another mentioned that Eleanor's decline had been unusually rapid and accompanied by symptoms, severe nausea, confusion, organ stress, that seemed inconsistent with her previous condition. Michael asked to see Eleanor's medical records. He was her son and had legal right to access them. What he found raised more questions: repeated mentions of unexplained symptoms, sudden kidney dysfunction, notes about acute decline of unknown origin. And then he saw something that made him pause, a note from a nurse stating that Eleanor had mentioned feeling strange after drinking tea her daughter brought. If you're still watching, hit like now. What Michael discovers next will turn grief into suspicion, and suspicion into a criminal investigation that almost didn't happen. Michael contacted Eleanor's primary care physician and asked a direct question: could my mother have been poisoned? The doctor was initially dismissive. Eleanor had been elderly, in declining health, and there was no evidence of foul play. But when Michael pointed out the rapid progression of symptoms and the unusual circumstances around the will change, the physician agreed to review the case more carefully. The physician contacted the nursing home and requested a full review of Eleanor's final weeks. Staff members were interviewed. Medical charts were analyzed. And one detail emerged that caught everyone's attention. Rebecca had been the only family member bringing outside food and beverages to Eleanor during the period when her symptoms worsened. Michael then did something that would prove critical. He contacted the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's office and requested that they investigate his mother's death. He explained his concerns about the will change, the rapid decline, and the suspicious circumstances. He also mentioned that his mother had been cremated, which meant tissue samples were no longer available for testing. But there was one thing Rebecca had not accounted for: hospital blood samples. When Eleanor had been seen by her physician during her final decline, blood had been drawn and stored as part of routine lab work. Those samples, though weeks old, were still preserved in the hospital laboratory system. Michael requested that those samples be tested specifically for ethylene glycol poisoning. The medical examiner agreed. Testing began immediately. And within 72 hours, the results came back positive. Eleanor Whitmore had been poisoned with antifreeze. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office opened a homicide investigation the same day the toxicology results confirmed poisoning. Detectives began by interviewing nursing home staff, reviewing visitor logs, and examining Eleanor's financial records. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction: Rebecca Whitmore. Staff members confirmed that Rebecca had been the primary visitor during Eleanor's final weeks and that she routinely brought beverages her mother consumed. Security footage showed Rebecca entering Eleanor's room multiple times daily, often carrying large insulated cups. Investigators obtained warrants to search Rebecca's home and financial records. The search of Rebecca's townhouse uncovered critical evidence: an unmarked container of ethylene glycol hidden under her kitchen sink, internet search history showing queries like "how much antifreeze is fatal" and "symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning," and financial documents revealing over $200,000 in gambling debts. Detectives also discovered that Rebecca had contacted the life insurance company the day after Eleanor's death to initiate the claim process, a move that seemed premature and calculating given that most grieving families wait weeks before handling such matters. When confronted, Rebecca initially denied everything. She claimed the antifreeze was for her car. She said her internet searches were research for a blog post. She insisted the will change had been her mother's idea. But as evidence mounted, the toxicology report, the search history, the financial desperation, the timeline of the will change, her story began falling apart. Don't click away now. The next chapter shows how a woman who seemed like the perfect daughter is confronted with evidence she can't deny, and how justice almost slipped away. Detectives brought Rebecca in for formal questioning. In the interrogation room, they laid out the evidence methodically. The poison in her home, the searches on her computer, the financial motive, the timeline showing she had changed the will just days before administering a lethal dose. Rebecca's attorney advised her to stop talking, but she had already said enough. She had admitted to bringing the drinks. She had admitted to financial stress. She had admitted to being present during Eleanor's final hours. Rebecca Whitmore was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, elder abuse, and fraud. Bail was set at $1 million. She could not afford it. She sat in Hillsborough County Jail awaiting trial, the same place where criminals far less calculating than her had ended up. Rebecca's trial began 8 months later in a Hillsborough County courtroom. Prosecutors presented a devastating case built on 3 pillars: forensic evidence, financial motive, and digital footprints. The toxicology report was undeniable. Eleanor's preserved blood samples contained lethal levels of ethylene glycol, the active poison in antifreeze. Medical experts testified that the symptoms Eleanor experienced in her final weeks, nausea, organ failure, confusion, were classic signs of antifreeze poisoning, not natural decline. Financial investigators detailed Rebecca's desperation. Over $200,000 in gambling debts, maxed-out credit cards, and a failing business. They showed the timeline. Rebecca changed the will on October 15th, making herself the sole $1.5 million beneficiary. Eleanor died on October 18th, 3 days later. Digital forensics presented Rebecca's internet search history: how much antifreeze is fatal, symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, can antifreeze be detected in autopsy? The searches were made in the weeks leading up to Eleanor's death. Nursing home staff testified that Rebecca had been the only visitor bringing outside beverages during Eleanor's final decline. Security footage showed her entering Eleanor's room repeatedly with large insulated cups. Michael testified about his mother's character and how unlikely it was that she would have cut him entirely out of the will. He described the moment he requested toxicology testing, a decision that exposed the murder. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial and that Rebecca's internet searches were innocent research. But they had no answer for the ethylene glycol container found in Rebecca's home, the timing of the will change, or the toxicology report. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, elder abuse, and fraud. Rebecca showed no emotion as it was read. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole, calling her actions a calculated betrayal of the most fundamental bond, murdering a parent for money. Rebecca never received the $1.5 million. Under Florida law, individuals convicted of murdering someone cannot profit from that person's death. The insurance policy was redistributed according to Eleanor's original will, half to Michael, half to the charity Eleanor had intended to support. If you've made it this far, subscribe now. The final chapter shows how one murder changed nursing home safety laws across Florida, and what families need to watch for. Eleanor Whitmore's death became a turning point in Florida elder care. State legislators used her case to pass stricter protocols requiring nursing homes to report suspicious deaths even when natural causes seem obvious. Medical examiners now routinely test for ethylene glycol poisoning in elderly patients who die with unexplained organ failure. Sunset Gardens, the nursing home where Eleanor died, implemented new rules. All outside food and beverages brought by visitors must be logged and approved. Staff receive annual training on recognizing financial exploitation warning signs, sudden will changes, family members isolating patients, or symptoms that worsen only when specific visitors are present. Michael Whitmore became an advocate for elder abuse prevention. He speaks at conferences across Florida, warning families about the dangers of unchecked access to vulnerable seniors. He describes his mother as a kind woman who trusted the wrong person, her own daughter. Rebecca remains in Lowell Correctional Institution, Florida's largest women's prison. She has never expressed remorse. In one prison interview, she stated only, "People don't understand financial pressure. They don't know what it's like to lose everything." The $1.5 million insurance payout funded a scholarship in Eleanor's name for nursing students studying geriatric care, a legacy Eleanor would have chosen herself, helping others even in death. In courtrooms across Florida, prosecutors reference the Whitmore case when arguing for thorough investigations into elderly deaths. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a vulnerable adult's life is the one who smiles the brightest, visits the most often, and asks for power of attorney at exactly the right moment. Eleanor's grave in Tampa has a simple inscription: "Beloved mother, grandmother, friend." What it does not say is that her death exposed a predator, changed laws, and saved future lives by showing what happens when trust is weaponized by those we love most. If this story made you think about an aging parent or relative in care, share this video. Elder abuse, financial, emotional, and physical, kills thousands every year and costs families billions. Subscribe for more true crime stories that show how predators operate and what warning signs families need to watch for. Thanks for watching.